My husband took a single shot to the heart. He was murdered. And in 6 short minutes, our lives were changed forever.
What if I'd opened the door? What if I'd done this? We all get to choose whether whatever happens to us is a full stop or it's a comma. If you can reframe where you find yourself, then you can re-script and re-author your life. You can either see life as a punishment or you can see it as an adventure.
The world is disruptive, there's change. Sometimes really good things come out of change and sometimes not so good things. So that's why I've invited Nikki Bush to visit us today, because she's a human potential specialist and she's brought that wisdom to us on future-proof yourself. So welcome to the show, Nikki.
Thank you, Kim.
So when I read this book, I love the fact that it feels very much like a how-to manual. And I think that that's something that we're lacking, because even when I train on emotional intelligence, people sometimes say, you've given me a task to do, but how do I do it? You know, very often we say, just figure it out. And so that's why I really like the practical approach that you've put to it. And I also love the fact that you've aligned family to being your first team.
Absolutely. So, Kim, I'm a very practical person. My trademark is being able to take the complex and making it accessible. I'm a sense maker. And I don't believe that work and life are separate. We are one integrated human being. And everything we participate in is an avenue of self-expression. So whatever you do at work, what you do at home, if you're a parent, if you choose not to be a parent, if you're a grandparent, whatever it is, we find avenues of self-expression. That does not mean that life unfolds in a straight line. And that's why I wrote the book, because we actually go through way more change and disruption than we even acknowledge. And change and disruption doesn't have to be negative. It can also be positive by choice. And so the book really is a practical look at life, at the ups and the downs, the paradox of being human. Because you can either see life as a punishment or you can see it as an adventure. And the essence of the book is about being able to reframe. If you can reframe where you find yourself, then you can re-script and re-author your life. So whatever happens to you, positive or negative, we all get to choose whether whatever happens to us is a full stop, the end of everything we know, we become a victim, or it's a comma, a pause on our way, not in our way. And that is critical to how you navigate your life and how you're going to succeed in your life and in your various avenues of self-expression.
Okay, so delving a little bit deeper, when you say that, and I've listened to your talks, I've listened to the one that you spoke about, the different jackets that you wear, there does come a time where it does feel like it is grinding to a halt.
Yes, so we are faced with moments in our lives that literally freeze us on the spot, where we are frozen in shock, in fear. We just can't move forward. We can't see the future. It's very, very important that when we go through stuff, that we don't shove the feelings under the rug, that we actually take them as a signal, not a sentence, because emotions are data, they're information, and that we actually work with them, that we get muddy with them, that we get into the trenches of life and feel what we have to feel and get the support we need to get in order to continue to move forward, even if it's just baby steps. So motion is very, very important. That doesn't mean there won't be moments where we're going to crawl up under a blanket on the couch and cover our head with that blanket and go, I wish the world would just go away and leave me alone. We all have those kinds of moments. I think there is a risk of toxic positivity sometimes, where people really deny what they're feeling. The problem with that is then you don't grow, because your head, your heart, they're muscles, and they have to be exercised and they have to be trained. And life throws us situations and circumstances all the time. How we respond to those things, whether we embrace them or whether we push them away, that's your choice. I find that when you push them away, they come back and they bite you in ever more destructive ways further down the track. So as a strategic leadership coach, I can honestly tell you that there isn't a person who sits in my coaching chair who hasn't got long-standing patterns that are driving the narrative. And if you don't unpack those patterns, they will keep writing your story for you, and you'll keep reacting, not responding to stuff that for some people is almost invisible. Yes. So very disempowering when you don't know what it is that drives your decisions, your behaviors, and even the tough stuff that happens to us. We need to delayer it. We need to work with it. It's always going to be part of who we are. You can't get rid of it, but you can understand how it has shaped you and how you can move on from it and with it, because you need to absorb it into who you are and make sense of it so that you can make different decisions moving forwards.
So the reason that I bring up the really grinding to a halt thing is because you had a really deeply personal experience where your husband was murdered in the house. And that is a grinding to the halt moment. It's not something that you can ever change. You can never bring that person back. You can never change the trauma that it affected your children. Explain, if you were looking at it from the book's perspective, the navigation of that process.
So we were attacked in our home, an armed home invasion at 3:00 on an early Saturday morning. And in 6 short minutes from the time the intruders entered our home to the time they left, our lives were changed forever. And time was divided into 2 parts, before this and after this, and nothing would ever be the same again. In that split second, my husband took a single shot to the heart. He was murdered. I locked myself away in the bathroom. I didn't go to his rescue. I didn't wake up my 18-year-old son, who was writing final matric exams. There are 2 things that I think saved my life. And the one was I ran a plan. We'd always told our children, because we live in this beautiful but very unpredictable, sometimes violent country, that if we ever told them to run, they were to lock themselves in the bathroom, not ask questions, and only come out when we told them to. And so locking myself away behind a solid, thick Meranti door that they tried to kick down 3 times, didn't budge, was one thing that saved my life. The other thing that saved my life was I made 6 emergency calls on my phone, because I had the presence of mind to grab my phone before I ran into the bathroom. The third thing was when they had my son on the other side of the door at gunpoint, I refused to open the door, and that was feminine instinct. It took about 9 months for me to work out, what if I had opened the door? What if I'd done this? What if, as a mother, I didn't open the door for my son? It's something that remained between us for about 5 years. It was part of his trauma. He could never come and sleep in our home again. So we didn't just lose my husband, we lost our home. So 2 anchors at the same time. So it was really gut-wrenching stuff.
Yes.
However, 9 months after this terrible ordeal, I was with my physiotherapist and we were musing over the what-if questions. And she said, for as long as your son had nothing to protect, he had nothing to lose. If I had opened that door, he would have had everything to protect and everything to lose. And the outcome may have been very, very different. After my husband's funeral that evening, we held a wake for nearest and dearest friends and family. And at 10 o'clock that night, when everybody started to leave, that's when I started to cry. Because the reality of my situation really hit me at that point. That first week after death is kind of predictable. Millions of people have walked it. It's kind of ritualized and certain things happen at certain times. But suddenly the rest of my life opened up in front of me and it was unrecognizable. And all my control had been taken away. And as I was standing there and people were leaving, my tears were pouring down my face, and a friend was standing next to me who serendipitously happened to be a psychologist. And she said, "Nix, what's happening for you right now?" And I said, "Well, this moment feels like a full stop in my life, like the end of everything I know. All our hopes and dreams absolutely smashed." And she said to me, "Can I encourage you to try and turn this full stop into a comma?" She said, "It's a comma and ... It took a good 9 months for that analogy to land for me. And it was a moment when I was preparing to give a talk, the first talk about the 6 minutes that changed our lives for a women's event. They'd specifically asked for that story. And at that point, I was a very raw new widow, and nothing was linear. It was a complicated, messy, incomplete process. And all I could see in that moment was the collateral damage to me and my family. And I was really angry. But there have been some shining light moments in the past 9 months. So I folded a piece of paper in half lengthways, and I wrote collateral damage on the left-hand side and collateral beauty on the right-hand side. And
that part is actually in the book.
It is in the book. And it's an exercise that I share with so many audiences. And during COVID, I shared this all the time with millions of people because it's an exercise in keeping perspective.
Yes.
So I downloaded without judgment every negative thing on the left-hand side of the page under damage, from the fact that in my 50th year, I'd become a widow, I'd lost my husband, I'd lost the future co-grandparent of my future grandchildren, which really, really cut deep for me. I'm a real family person. And I continued writing about, all the negative emotions, all the people who'd come in and dump their negativity on me because, people who've been through similar things or whatever come and compare theirs to yours. 2.5 pages later, I'd kind of exhausted the well of negativity.
Yes.
And I knew I had at least 10 good things to write down. So I started on the right-hand side of the page under collateral beauty. And I completely surprised myself, Kim, because 5 pages later, I was still writing about the good stuff, the possibilities, the opportunities, the love, the support, the learnings, the giftings that had appeared in my life despite or in spite of my husband's death. And that was the moment that perspective arrived and hope stepped back in. That was the moment where I understood you either choose the full stop or you choose the comma. And the ... the comma and ... those dots have been made up of new people, new places, new opportunities. While I was processing all this big emotional stuff, at around sort of 9 months or so, I realized that you have to put yourself back out in the world, because when you go through an experience that breaks you open,
yes,
you have to reinvent yourself and you have to look at yourself through a new set of lenses. I had been looking at myself through my husband's set of lenses for 23 years. Now the question was, who is Nikki without Simon? And we'd actually been together, not 23 years, we'd been together for 28 years, married for 26 years, in the same home for 23 years. We were Mr. and Mrs. Consistency. And in order to see myself differently, I had to even break beyond immediate family and closest friends to be with people who were only experiencing me now in this version of Nikki. And that was really empowering. So actually, disruption and change is with us all the time. We need to become more aware of it, because it comes as a teacher. And that's the important thing, is if we can greet change as a teacher on our life's adventure, it changes the narrative.
Yes, it does. And I think, that's what's nice about the checklist, is because you mentioned in their community, exercise, the different kinds of things. But I just want to go back to the toxic positivity, because sometimes, it's almost like there's a witch hunt on positivity. So that if you're choosing to reframe, people will naturally accuse you of, oh, it's toxic positivity. So to me, toxic positivity would be those people who would say, yes, your husband passed away, but you've at least still got your children.
Yeah.
And there are
that one.
people say that. But what is reframing? And if I was speaking to someone who was going through that kind of really debilitating change, what is the correct positive way of approaching it?
We need to see change as a process, not an event.
Yes.
So take marriage, for example. The wedding day is the event, but the marriage is a process that lasts for as long as the marriage lasts.
Yes.
A death is a moment in time, but recovering from that and mourning and grieving and moving through all of that is a process. So embracing change as a process of growth and adjustment is the mindset that we need to have. And then to understand that you're going to go through stages and they're not necessarily linear, as in they don't go A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and then you're done. You actually come back to those stages over and over again. Because we're human, we get triggered. So you can be triggered further down the track back to something that happened. And being aware of these stages is important. So let's just look at those 7 stages. They kind of align with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's 5 stages of grief, but they're a little bit different. So the first stage is immobilization. So if you're aware that you're feeling shocked, terrified, frozen, some people actually get frozen in that moment and never move on. Okay, that's what you want to avoid. But acknowledging that this is normal is the right thing. Then you move into minimizing the threat. So minimization is all about the brilliance of the brain. Your brain is in self-preservation mode. So it scans every experience you've ever had. And if you haven't had a similar experience to compare with this threat, it will find something someone else has been through. So, we do have this version of AI between our ears, and the brain will find something to compare what you're going through to something else to make you feel you can cope. You've overcome before, which gives you that resilience muscle to say, oh, this is what I'm going through now feels like the end of everything I know, the worst thing I've ever been through. But there's a little voice in the back of your mind that goes, yeah, but you've actually survived something before and you can do it again. It's going to be hard, but... or and, maybe and. So minimization is normal. So from minimization, we go into depression. Even men, those men who are watching, yes, everybody goes into a withdrawal phase because you feel incompetent and out of control because you've never been here before. And this is really important to acknowledge. And it's a real thing. And if you can acknowledge it, you can actually get out of it. You may need some help. I needed extreme help. I could never have started working again 2.5 months after my husband's death without an enormous amount of coaching and counseling and medication. And from depression, you move to acceptance. Acceptance is getting to that place where you stop looking back and wishing you could go backwards, and you start looking forwards. This is my new reality. And you have to stop wishing for what you cannot have. So acceptance is a very important point in your healing. And from acceptance, you start testing your new reality. Who am I in this new space? And that is both exciting and terrifying at the same time. But this is the human paradox. And this was probably the big lesson that I learned through my trauma, is that it is quite possible to be happy and sad at the same time. because of all our different avenues of self-expression, my emotional life had imploded completely and was unrecognizable. But where I felt sane was in my work life, which was actually expanding and evolving and growing at a rate of knots. And I had this kind of paradox of, this is going so well, and this is a complete disaster. And I think I got really adept and good at going, it's okay. And from then we go into internalizing our reality and finding meaning, because we're human. So we've got to find meaning in what's happened to us. What have we learned? How have we grown? And I always say, once you can answer those two questions and quantify them, what have I learned through this terrible ordeal, and how have I grown from it? Then you can start letting go of it, and it doesn't dominate your life anymore.
I think that the big thing is to be able to embrace the new identity. So the business that I was involved in with over 20 years serviced the event industry, and there were no events. So I'd actually launched my very first book the day before the president announced lockdown in South Africa. And it was at a book fair. And 10 days afterwards, I was in the process of returning deposits for people that had paid me for work. And the only income that I got was that first royalty that came through from the book launch.
Which is not a lot, I know, having written books.
Yes, absolutely. And then it came to, the book was on Amazon. And like clockwork, every month Amazon paid. Still not enough to feed a family, but it made me realize this is an asset. And it's an asset that is going to increase at the rate of inflation, because as inflation goes up, you are going to be selling your book at that selling point. And if you can continue to replicate it, it makes a big difference. And from there, that's when people started asking me to consult. So although COVID was horrible, when I reframed it, I looked at it birthed a new career for me, one that I found so much more fulfilling than the old career. There was a moment when I was in the old career, I had one particular client, we used to call her Money Lisa, because I turned over a significant amount of money with her, and every time she asked me for a quote, I had approximately a 68% success rate. So we would drop everyone's work when Money Lisa. And she had these terrible client base. She worked a lot with the government, and they do things very much the last minute. So I would get this work in, and she would say, I need you to quote me within 24 hours. The one time we did this event for her where we got the deposit on the Saturday and we had to deliver first thing on the Tuesday morning, 350 branded items of a whole bunch of different things. So it was working through the night, and the one day I hadn't been exercising, I hadn't had enough water, and I developed this terrible bloody infection. And my daughter said to me, Mommy, you need to go lie down. I can see you are so sick. So I said, Money Lisa's quote needs to go out. So she said, well, what can I do to help you while you're doing that? I said, just bring the water. So she kept on bringing the water. The moment, and I was sweating, the moment that quote was gone, I then could go lie down. And I thought to myself, I actually hate this business. I hate it so much. But I couldn't get out of it. My husband was in training, and then, he's like, Kim, what else are the options? Are you going to go get a job? And when we were speaking to Adrian earlier on, he said he's unemployable. I kind of feel I'm unemployable. I don't think I could assimilate into corporate. He said, you could be earning a lot of money in corporate from a marketing perspective. And I said, I just don't want to, but I don't want this. I don't want to sell my soul. The one evening we were working with a job overnight and my kids were alone at home. My daughter barricaded the door with a telescope and a whole bunch of things. And, I don't want this anymore. And COVID gave me that gift. It cut the business off at the knees, and I stepped into something that I find fulfilling.
You see, you're highlighting the fact that disruption opens a doorway to reinvention.
Yes.
If you can see it. And many people can't. That's the difference between the collateral damage and the collateral beauty. For me, COVID was an amazing point of reinvention. in my business, but so was my husband's death. But I can go back in my life to other moments where I had disruptive times, health-wise, etc., that were also those moments of pause and reflection. But we arrived to this place, you and I sitting here on these two chairs having this interview because of all the choices and the decisions and the experiences that we've had to date. And so we need to celebrate the journey of how we got to here, even the bad bits, the uncomfortable bits. And discomfort is kind of the price of life, because we don't seem to learn when things, the really big lessons, when things are going well.
Wouldn't it be nice if we could, though?
And this is part of the human condition, is that we tend to learn the really important things at the feet of pain and disappointment and discouragement and disillusionment. And if you're open to learning the lessons, of course, you get more resilient. And for me, the key to resilience is curiosity. So are you curious enough to ask the very important question, can it be another way? That's how innovation happens, when we're curious enough to ask questions of our personal, emotional, professional lives. Can we do it differently? And if we can, how could we do it differently? Then we go through those 7 stages of adjustment to change, and we stress test the model. And that's why, personal and professional change are actually very closely aligned, because if you go through a massive professional change, it will reflect in your personal life and vice versa. So I am one of those people who talks about integration. I'm an integrated person. Everything that's happened to me is part of who I am. And I don't like splicing and dicing myself into little pieces. Now, if you go back 10, 20 years, especially when women first entered the workplace, they were having to splice and dice themselves into tiny pieces, and never the twain shall meet. And I think that's a very unhealthy way.
Absolutely. A quick question specifically about publishing. You chose to go traditional publishing. Any thoughts of, if you were to write another book, would you go that route again?
I think it very much depends where you are in your career and how well established your name and your brand is. So I landed up with Penguin Random House right at the beginning of my speaking career 20 years ago. And it was important for me at that point to be endorsed by a very well-known publisher. So it did my career an enormous service that a well-known, well-respected publisher respected my thinking and my thoughts enough to put their stamp of approval on it. Today, 5 books on, 5 books with well-known publishers, I'm at a space in my evolution, in my brand development, in my positioning in the market, where I could self-publish if I choose to do so. So I now sit with that question with the next 5 books that I've got in my head as to what will I do. And I think what is an important consideration today is, because of online retail sales, the online sellers can cut the price of a book in half. So what it sells for in a bookstore, bricks and mortar, and what it sells for online can be 2 vastly different prices. And for me, that changes the value of my book.
So the pricing is a really important consideration, but I also know that with a lot of distribution agents that work through Exclusive Books and the other big retail outlets, is that when you go into a contract with them, you sign a contract about what the book will sell at. But from a digital perspective, it does make a difference. And what I also like about the self-publishing route is that I don't have to buy the book from the publisher. I can print it on demand as I need to for whatever event there is. So it's a vastly different decision, and it speaks towards change.
Yes. So yeah, would I consider publishing my own next time? I'm probably about 80% convinced that that's the way to go. Also, you can do it at a price point that's going to earn you a lot more money. I've sold hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of rands worth of books over the years. And I've made money out of them, but it's not my primary income. It's a really good calling card. It's all about credibility. And it's really something that is worth having. So when you're the speaker at the conference and they buy one for every person in the room, that's marketing. And I come off a public relations and marketing base. So I really understand having marketing collateral, having sales armor has a value to it. So you don't always have to have something that's making you money. It could be making you money in a different way because it opens doors. So you've got to ask yourself, why are you writing the book? Credibility, authority, marketing, positioning. There's so many reasons to write a book, apart from the fact that you're packaging all your thoughts and ideas in a vehicle which forces you to think differently. So for me, the book writing process is more than just the outcome. It's also the process that is important for my own development, my own evolution, because it also spawns new things along the way, and that's part of the adventure.
I find that now with the writing of the book that I'm working on at the moment with postpartum depression, it is unlocking a whole bunch of different avenues that I never thought of beforehand. Nikki, I want to say thank you so much for being here, for sharing your insights, for sharing your book with the world. Remember to grab a copy of this. And so thank you everyone for watching. Remember to sign on, subscribe so that you can get the next interview and you can hear more from wonderful speakers like Nikki Bush.